What's up everybody, Horny back here with another video. This past week has been very interesting to say the least. I'm back at university. For those of you who don't know, I'm studying interactive journalism at City University of London. And this was the first week of classes after the winter break. It started with a week-long course called Political Headlines. The course was focused on teaching us the ins and outs of the British political system from a journalistic perspective. Now, this week was also interesting because the UK Parliament had a vote on the Brexit deal, and the Brexit deal failed massively. And we actually went to Parliament on Wednesday, the day after the vote, and got to speak to some very interesting people. We met John Bercow, who is the Speaker of the Parliament, Will Straw, and worked for the Remain campaign. We met Nigel Evans. He is a Conservative MP and was involved with the Leave campaign. And they sort of gave us their perspective on why the UK decided to leave the EU. We also met Stefan Rousseau. He is a political photographer and has been following UK politicians for a number of years. And what I did during that day was record as much as I possibly could. Now, I was using some rather new equipment, so it's not quite perfect yet, but every time I create a new video, I learn something new, so everything's moving in the right direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the highlights of the day, and then I'm also going to be uploading the majority of the recordings that I actually made, so you can, like, if you're really interested in geeking out over British politics, yeah, most of the footage that I recorded that day will be there.
Okay, would you perhaps start off with saying just a little bit about the extraordinary times we're in at the moment?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for coming. Good luck with your journalism studies, and if you want to be a practicing journalist, I hope you're successful, whatever form that might take, whether you want to be a news reporter, or whether you're more interested in being a columnist, whether you want to work for PA, or indeed, for that matter, whether print or broadcast journalism is your particular interest. Perhaps I ought just to say at the outset, because I'm not addressing a group of politics students, I don't want to take anything for granted, that I have really three roles, to which I've cheaply added a fourth. The first role is to chair in the chamber, which is far away the best known and most visible function of the Speaker in the chair, which is analogous to being a referee or an umpire of a football match or a cricket match, keeping all the encouraging people to take part, having down the number of people excluded as a result of bad behaviour. The second role is outside the chamber. It is scarcely known, but is quite relevant, and that is that I chair the House of Commons Commission, which is the strategic governing body of the House responsible for the staff services and property of the estate. So we're constantly making judgments about how money should be spent, what works are required. And bear in mind, of course, that not only are we an employer, we have approximately 1,750 people employed by the House. We have a great many others who are contracted to work for the House and who are resident, in employment terms, functioning on the parliamentary estate. And we're a World Heritage Site. We have about 1 million people a year visiting. So that role as executive, non-executive chairman of the board is a relevant role for the Speaker as well. The third function is to meet and greet visitors from across the country and around the world. So, for example, President Obama coming here in 2011, the Chinese president a couple of years ago, and so on. And the fourth function, which I added, I say cheaply, but only add in a sense, with the ballast or reinforcement of a successful campaign to the elected Speaker, is the role of Ambassador for Parliament and robust advocate of democratic politics out with, beyond the parliamentary estate. So, for example, I do a lot of visits around the country to schools and colleges and universities and voluntary organisations to talk about the role of Parliament and the functions of the Speaker and how our democracy works and in what way people can engage with and seek to influence it. And as part of that, if you will, ambassadorial role, I also host a lot of events here, not just for groups of journalism students from City University, though of course they are very much at the top of the list in terms of illustrious visitors to the state rooms, but charities, voluntary organisations, good causes are celebrated here typically 3 or 4 times a week. and have been throughout my tenure. So I think we counted the other day, I think in 2018 we had about 120 events here during the year for a variety of organisations. So that's how I go about my work. Now, as far as where we are politically is concerned, I've never known anything quite like it. There is no doubt that these are momentous times, and you will know that the difficulty that we've all got here is that the referendum result said Britain is leaving the European Union. That was the vote. Now, it wasn't a very large majority, but it was the majority verdict. There was no threshold requirement, nothing that said there had to be 60% of the vote, or there has to be a specified proportion of the electorate voting. And of course, as we know, 16 and 17-year-olds perfectly lawfully did not vote. That matter, that proposition, that idea that they should be able to do so was put to the House of Commons, if memory serves me correctly, and was rejected. Principally because David Cameron, on behalf of the government, that didn't want to establish the precedent of 16 and 17-year-olds voting, so they didn't. So we've got the result, but on the other hand, what does it mean? Did it mean to you, did it mean to other people that we would leave the single market? Did it mean we would leave the customs union? What did it mean? It was a simple, what they call binary question: do you wish to remain a member of the European Union, yes or no? And the answer narrowly was no. And there are a lot of people in Parliament, not everybody, we know this, but a lot of people in Parliament who think that leaving without a deal is extremely hazardous for the UK, and that's certainly the majority of you, without a shadow of doubt in the House. There's a body of opinion that says, oh no, quite happy to leave with no deal, we've just got to get out. That's what people want. So there is a genuine and honourable difference of opinion. And Parliament has got somehow to try to sort this matter out. And you may have seen in recent days there's some speculation, which I can't really comment on very much, as to whether the government will remain in control of the process of departure, or whether perhaps conceivably Parliament might assert itself and say what it wants. And the issue is complicated by the fact that, of course, we must operate within our rules, which don't necessarily envisage every scenario, and complicated by the fact that this is a minority government. It doesn't have an overall majority in the House. So potentially there is a role for parliamentarians to say, well, we don't want this to happen, we don't want the clock to be run down, we certainly don't want to depart without a deal, we're going to try to grab some sort of control of the process. So we will see, and the Speaker is sort of stuck in the middle. Am I party to some sort of plot that some of the more bigoted newspapers suggest? I'm not party to any plot. I made clear, I once answered the question of the University a couple of years ago, and admitted that in the referendum I personally voted to remain in the EU. I thought that made sense for a whole variety of reasons. But it's not the Speaker's job either to make Brexit happen or to stop Brexit happening. That's not my role. My role is, however, to seek to facilitate the House of Commons. And so I've often said, and I make no apology for doing so, that the Speaker is not going to be pushed around by representatives of what I call the executive branch, that is to say the government. I'm not going to be told what to do by a government minister or a government whip. And if I have to make a judgment about whether to select an amendment, I'll make that judgment, thanks very much. I'm not going to be told by the Chief Whip what I can and can't do. The other day the Chief Whip came up to me in the chair and was very angry, and I said to him, Julian, don't bang your fist at me. I will decide in accordance with my powers what I think is appropriate. I'm not going to be pushed around by you. And that's the end of it.
Just following on what you were saying about amendments earlier, how are we doing for time, Jim? What time is it?
Got 11 minutes.
Okay, 9 past.
It's 15 past.
Okay. If backbenchers choose to make interventions on the motion may have to make on Monday, what will be your parameters for deciding whether you allow those amendments in that specific case?
Well, that's quite a good answer, but I don't know what the motion is that she will table. I don't know what motion the Prime Minister might table, but my sense is that there is a strong desire in the House to have a number of options able to be considered. And You know, I would hope that the motion would allow people to put forward alternative propositions, almost like having a series of indicative votes. You know, who wants to extend Article 50? Who wants Canada Plus, you know, as a Brexit solution? Who wants a Norway arrangement? Who wants a second referendum or single people's vote? I mean, I would hope that there might well be a motion that would lend itself to such amendments, not because I'm supporting one amendment rather than another, because I'm not, that's not for me to do, but because I think that these are the issues at the heart of the debate. And so I would hope that a motion is amendable to allow for a number of different alternatives, and that is what would be in my mind, you know, looking at something, you know, is this a possible alternative? This is a reasonable suggestion which is worth testing in front of the House. You know, we would test the will of the House on a number of different ideas.
Yeah. I was just wondering if we, as we move closer to this March 29th deadline, are you balancing allowing governmental representation through amendments and actually just getting a decision in Parliament for what will be done by that deadline?
Well, I mean, in agreeing to the amendment from Dominic Green the other day, I wanted to short-circuit the process a bit, because otherwise the government could have taken 3 weeks before bringing anything to the House, whereas in fact it now has to do so because his amendment was successful by Monday. So, I mean, I think a debate with options, you know, would be a day's debate or 2 days debate. So I think it would be perfectly possible for the House of Commons to come to a view about some of these matters relatively soon, and then one would hope that there would still be time, if the Article 50 hadn't been extended, or the House hadn't expressed its desire to extend it, and I would hope that there would be time for these matters to be clarified and finalised before March the 29th. But if the will of the House were to extend the article, well then there would be a bit more leeway. Do you see what I mean? If the deadline were extended, then there would be longer in which to reach decisions, including any legislative material coming through Parliament or the result from
It's one of those moments, just a regular visit to Bedford, I think, where you're going to some kind of group he was meeting in a cafe in Bedford. Potentially a very dull visit, but you never know. And on his way in, I was already in, he just kind of paused at the window before he came in and just looked in, and it just looks like he's sort of gazing at the common people. I like that a lot. Now this is obviously the famous headstone. Again, in the 2015 election campaign, and it was towards, I think it was the last weekend of the campaign, and we were all pretty tired and fed up by this time. I'd spent half my time with him, half my time with David Cameron. And the morning, this was a Saturday, down in Hastings, and that morning they said, we've got something really good for you today, it's going to be amazing, but you've got it to yourself, but can you hold on to it till, don't file it till 6 o'clock or something, because we're going to give the Observer story exclusive. I said, okay then. And they wouldn't tell me what it was, and I got there and looked at this, and I thought, oh my God, it's awful, it's terrible. But I thought it was terrible in a dull, I just thought, there's no story, that's awful, it's kind of a big thing. And I didn't actually take that many pictures, because it was so bad, it's not a story. And then of course, I later realised it was so bad, that was a story, it was awful, it was just a huge story. And they even tried to stop me, they said, oh, can you not put the pictures out today? They suddenly realised everything was going on Twitter about this end. It quickly got named the headstone. They suddenly realised what a profit they made. They tried to stop me from putting pictures up, but I just said, I think we're gone. You know. And obviously they went everywhere. And then, just coincidentally, the next day I was joining David Cameron again for the end of the campaign. By that time I worked out he was going to win. And they loved me for it. I was a big hero in their camp. Put that picture out. Always just great for pictures, as you probably get. Just a delight. This is in Tokyo, the street in Tokyo where they play street rugby. And he just completely flattened this kid. And so you never know with Boris, he was just always up for it, you know, he'd always try to... I think he's actually quite a nice chap, he just wants to please you, if you're a journalist or a photographer or anyone, he just kind of wants to give you what you think you want. And I don't think he did this to give us a picture, I just think he was quite competitive, genuinely. And he just thought, and he obviously knew those cameras there, so he thought, I'll give them some good pictures. and just keep it flat. And again, moved very well. And just amusing, you know.
Perhaps you could start off telling us about how you were pulling people together and what your aim was in running the campaign.
Yeah, thanks, Barney. As Barney says, I was the Executive Director of Britain Stronger in Europe, which became the designated campaign in the referendum. So we were responsible for the campaign on the Remain side, and we had the right to spend £7 million, which is the limit that you can spend. Just to give a bit of context, I come from a Labour Party background. The Remain campaign was obviously a coalition of different parties and different sort of groupings, but I sort of had my politics on the Labour side. And by profession, I've spent a lot of time on public policy and campaigning. So I worked on climate change campaigns and economic campaigns prior to running the EU campaign, and now I advise a mixture of charities and companies on their campaigns. I'm sure that all of you will have been sort of following this drama over the last 3.5 years closely, and it's been the biggest story, and many of you will have seen the TV drama that was on television a couple of weeks ago focusing on Dominic Cummings, who was the campaign director of the Vote Leave campaign, who was the main campaign on the Leave side. Some of you may have read the journalism of Carol Cadwallader, the Observer journalist who's been doing a lot of digging about some of the tactics that the Vote Leave campaign used, some of the data firms like Cambridge Analytica and Aggregate IQ that were used either by Vote Leave or by some of the other Leave campaigns run by Aaron Banks. And I'm sure those of you taking interest in more the sort of academic understanding of what happened will know about the big divides in our country, how older people tended to vote for Leave, how people outside of London and the big cities tended to vote for Leave, and how conversely younger people, people who'd spent longer in education, people who lived in cities and urban areas were more likely to vote Remain. And those are all important parts of understanding what happened in the referendum 2.5 years ago. But I think they missed the wider question. So finally you get into the campaign itself, and this is where most of the interest has been in recent years in trying to understand and unpick what happened during the referendum. But as I said, I think there were so many contextual things it's important to understand to see why the outcome happened as it did. But there were 3 key things that happened in the campaign on the Remain side where I think we made bad mistakes, and there were discussions and debates at the time where one point of view won out, and in the end I think history has borne out that they were the wrong things to do. The first was on the messaging. So I'm sure you all remember what Vote Leave's message was, and it featured in the TV drama about take back control. It was a really resonant message. It meant something to people. It sort of presented this idea of loss, that somehow over time something had been taken away, and they could then use it as a framework for all their different policies and ideas. They could talk about the loss of control over immigration, or the loss of control over budgets, which should be spent on the NHS, or the loss of control over our laws. And lots of different ways they could use it. I don't know if any of you can actually remember what the Remain campaign slogan was. Anyone wants to hazard a guess? Stronger in Europe. Okay, so perhaps a bit more recall than I can credit. It was a convoluted message. It was based on some quite serious and detailed polling, and what it showed was that there was it wasn't, I like to think, a lack of imagination. It was that there was a lack of understanding about what the EU was for. And when you look at these slides that Barney's put up, it's very complicated, and we're now probably better educated as a nation about the EU than we were 2.5 years ago. But going into the referendum, if you held a focus group and asked most people in the country if they could name a single tangible benefit about the EU, they couldn't. They couldn't tell you what it was for, what it did for them and their families. The only thing they had a hunch about was that we might be worse off overall if we left. That was what we had to go on. And that's why the message of the campaign was about the sort of strength that we could have in Europe and the risk of leaving, the leap in the dark. But it didn't really resonate with people in the way that take back control was. And as the campaign went on, there was a sort of desire in some parts of the campaign that we should try and change the message. We should have a different, more emotionally resonant message. And then the final thing, and it's a really important part of any campaign, you need to set out your own argument in the best possible light that you can. And as I said, from the starting point that we had, I don't think there were many other options about how we started the campaign, but we didn't pivot, we didn't find the right language and messaging as the campaign went on. But another really crucial part of it is you've got to be able to frame your opponents. You've got to be able to describe the motivations of your opponents and to try and sort of capture in the public imagination what it is that they would do if they won. And in recent history, some of you might remember from 2015 that famous poster of Ed Miliband in the pocket of Alex Salmond, the SNP leader. That was a brilliant visual image of how Labour was going to be in the pocket of the SNP if they became the largest party in the hung parliament. It really resonated and stuck with people. And then during the referendum, the Leave campaign were very effective in painting Remain as Project Fear, even though a lot of what they were doing in talking about immigration and talking about Turkey joining was actually much greater scaremongering than what we were doing. But in the public conscience, we were framed as being the Project Fear campaign. Of course, inside the campaign, we wanted to frame the other side. We wanted to say that Boris Johnson was more concerned about his job than your job. We wanted to paint the points about how there was so much internal battles inside the Conservative Party that were framing this election rather than people caring about the national interest. We wanted to point out the hypocrisy of people like Michael Gove and Boris Johnson, and Johnson in particular, who had said so recently about the problems of leaving the EU, and he'd written in, I think, 2013 about wanting to stay in the single market. But the number 10 team wouldn't sanction us criticising their Conservative colleagues. They thought they would win, and they had one eye on bringing the Conservative Party back together on June the 24th. And as a result, they wouldn't let us take the gloves off. And I remember one meeting we had where Peter Mandelson, the Labour peer, sat in a room in the Commons in George Osborne's office and said to George Osborne, "Why do you insist on bringing a spoon to a knife fight?" And that was very much the sentiment that we had at the time, that we were fighting the referendum with one hand tied behind our back because of the desire and the intent to bring their own party back together. So those are my 11 reasons, probably slightly over 10 minutes, for which I apologise. But I hope that gives a little bit of context and background about why it ended up being the defeat that it was. And look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. What I really like start off back then, take us into the vote itself. You were out in Istanbul at the time, you were talking to people in your constituency, you were talking more widely around the country. What do you feel were the defining issues back in 2016? What was it that won it for Leave at that point? And then take us up to date a little bit, if you would.
Okay, thank you very much, and I really enjoyed that one. It's lovely to sort of walk through all our yesterdays and get a reflection on what happened. I haven't seen this documentary or whatever you call it, TV drama, yeah. So I haven't seen it yet, but a lot of my colleagues who did see it enjoyed it. But clearly it is not a documentary, so we'll make clear on that. I guess finally it goes back for me. I'm a Tory born in Wales. I count that as God's little joke because, as you know, Wales is not a Tory stronghold. But nonetheless, when we joined the Common Market, as it was, with Ted Heath, we didn't have a referendum then. Ted decided it was a jolly good idea to go in, and in we went. And at that time I can remember thinking, actually it's a good idea to be part with a number of other countries, being able to trade freely in the way that we were doing. And so I was actually very supportive of that. But as the years went on, I became more disillusioned. Maybe it's because my father had a newsagent's business and I got to read all the newspapers for free. No internet in those days, as you can only imagine. And so I got a flavour of wonky bananas, and everything that was wrong was the fault of the common market or the European community as it later became. And there was a progression away from the common market into the what I see as an onward march to a United States of Europe. That's where I think that eventually some countries and some people and individuals want it to end up, and we will see. Maybe perhaps made a little bit easier by Britain exiting the European Union, but we'll find out. I did an interview with one Dominic Grieve on the BBC the night after the result. And as a colleague of yours, a fellow an absolute colleague of mine. Colleague is a great word. Colleague is a word you use when you can't use the word friend. It's used in this place time and time again. Anyway, we did this interview, and at the end of it, because he's incredibly intelligent and bright, far brighter than I am. Because when I looked at the results, I thought people just wanted to leave the European Union, but Dominic is so bright, he could see it in 12 different ways, none of which meant leave. And of course, he's carried on ever since. And he spoke to somebody the other day, and he says, no, I think we can remain in the European Union. And that's what he's pitting to do, to actually overturn the democratic wishes of the people of this country, using any device that he possibly can. And of course, in the meantime, we had a general election in which he stood on and said that we would deliver the Brexit that people voted for. It's very, very difficult to go into a general election, by the way, a snap general election that you call yourself having a 24-point lead. And it is a genius that can actually reduce that to 1%, which is what Teresa did. And wherein lies the problem now, which is we're in a minority government supported by the DUP, which we have a group of people on our own backbenches that will do anything they possibly can to thwart the referendum result, which resulted in many ways, Teresa pivoting away from the Lancaster House speech that she gave, which was a far more clear Brexit than the one that she dreamt up over the past 6 months or so, which she tried to sell on the Chequers deal. She's lost several Leave ministers. She told me that Brexiteers would be in charge of the negotiation at every stage. That clearly hasn't happened. And we then managed to devise a treaty that upset the 10 MPs from Northern Ireland who we rely on to govern. Think about that for a second. Somebody forgot about them? They are the umbilical cord that the government needs to govern. And we cut it. Last night, we sewed it back together again.
Good. We're going to lose you in 5 minutes. Well, I want to put in one quick question, and perhaps we can take a couple of questions for you from the audience, and then we've got a few more minutes as well. So, my one question, if I might, is you went through that no lobby last night with all the Labour folk and the SNP, and you had on one side of you Anna Seabury and Ken Clark and the Dominic Grieve and Conservatives who want to either overturn the referendum result altogether and get us to remain in, or get something so watered down that it embodies most of the points of the EU. Part of your known team were on that side, and on the other side you had diametrically opposite people, possibly I suspect like yourself, who are quite happy that we leave with no agreement, who think that the term crashing out is a nonsense term. Yeah. It's not crashing out, it is leaving as people voted to 2 years ago. But within your party, which May is now going to deal with, you've got totally different reasons for saying no last night. So what is the best way of something happening, or are you saying, actually, if nothing happens and we leave with no deal at all, fine by me?
Well, I prefer a deal, I have to say. The sequencing of the negotiations was done all badly wrong. To say that you can't talk about trade before you've got this withdrawal agreement is bonkers. Because if you get an FTA with the European Union, and we buy £341 billion worth of their goods, they buy 95 billion less of our goods. So there's a huge advantage for us wanting to carry on buying 850,000 German cars every year, 20% of Prosecco from Italy and all that sort of stuff. So there's a huge advantage to doing some form of FTA. Once that is established, then you know what the relationship between Ireland and Northern Ireland is going to be. But we weren't able to discuss any of that until after March the 29th, when then we have to try and sort out this insoluble problem of the Northern Ireland backstop, which treated Northern Ireland somewhat differently to the rest of us. And also, as I lined it yesterday, which doesn't give us the unilateral ability to leave the European Union. They could actually lock us into the backstop forever. Apparently taxation was a temporary measure. When that was introduced, we promised it wouldn't last long, and it did. It's still with us. It was a real problem. By the way, I've been an MP almost for 27 years. During that period of time, I have rebelled once. And that was in the early days on an inconsequential issue. Absolutely inconsequential. I told the government minister I'd rebel, and he laughed. He said, Nigel, because it was only like 5 of us there.
It mattered so much last night.
It mattered so much to me, yes. I wouldn't sit down with Anna Soubry and expect to get a common dialogue as to why we were there.
So if you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs down if you didn't, follow me on social media, and I'll see you in the next one.